the 2nd of July is the deadline for the political action group Let's Go Washington to turn in all those sheets, all those petitions. They've been out gathering signatures for several weeks now. Only really not that many weeks. I can't remember when they started, but it was a very narrow window for them, very small amount of time to gather signatures in hopes of repealing the newly passed income tax. So tomorrow they will be gathering in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, at the office of Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. And I've been down there for other petition dumps. They show up with their trucks, their vans full of these gigantic boxes and offload them in. The boxes are all, listing how many petitions are in there, how many roughly signatures are in each box. They have to turn in 308,911 signatures again by tomorrow's deadline. And it sounds like that is a doable thing at this point because I've been seeing kind of weekly or at least bi-weekly reports from Let's Go Washington of how many they have gathered. I do anticipate there will be people turning in petitions tomorrow, showing up at the event in Tumwater, maybe just because they want to be there for the event, but also having those last minute petitions that have been sitting on the kitchen table for days or weeks and they want to get those turned in. So that can happen tomorrow. You may recall, again, I want to give you a little bit of background to repeal the measure to repeal the newly passed income tax would qualify for the November ballot if, in fact, they have enough signatures. Now, a few weeks ago, Let's Go Washington's Darren Littell, I spoke with him about, the signature gathering effort. We talked a little bit about some of the ongoing harassment, vandalism for folks out gathering signatures, just like we saw the last couple of years with other Let's Go Washington petition drives. And I asked him about preparations for the statements that will be alongside this measure on the ballot and also will appear in the voter's guide. And he said it turns out those ballot statements and those statements that are in the voter's guide and online voter's guide as well are really important.
The statements actually come down to they're very important. A lot of people read them. We've done testing on it to see how many people read them and the kind of impact that it has on their vote. And people actually do a lot of research, which I think is good. I think that more informed people are when they go to cast their ballot, the better off they are. So, crafting these statements is a critical part of the election and making sure that they're done well and factually accurate, I think are really important pieces of it.
And I know we are in the height of summer. We've got our nation's 250th coming up this weekend. Everybody is just thinking about fun in the sun, but we are only 4 months away from the November election. And again, tomorrow in Tumwater is a critical day for Let's Go Washington and their supporters to turn in those petitions and find out if, in fact, they have enough signatures to qualify. They try to turn in way more than the 309,000 necessary because, of course, there are people that accidentally sign or on purpose sign twice, or people that aren't registered voters and think they can still sign. Some signatures that just don't match what the Secretary of State has on file for your voter signature. So lots of them get thrown out. So they're hoping to turn in a lot more than the 309,000 needed to qualify the measure for the fall ballot. But we will be there in Tumwater tomorrow. We will bring you exclusive updates on that. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Of course, now, though, once they do qualify, begins the big time campaign from opponents who have amassed a giant war chest to campaign against not only the income tax repeal attempt, but the other two initiatives that will be on the fall ballot. Those are the restoration of parental rights and the initiative to protect girls in sports. So if the income tax repeal gets qualified, we're going to have three initiatives on that November ballot. All right, let's get into gas taxes because on Wednesday here in the state of Washington, your state level gas taxes are going up again. This is an automatic inflation indexed July 1 tax hike. And this is based on a bill that passed in 2025 and was signed into law by Governor Ferguson. Um, it's only 1.1 cents, so it doesn't seem like a lot. But that brings the total per gallon excise tax to 56.5 cents. We've got, of course, a lot of other taxes. We've got federal taxes, we've got our CCA, our Climate Commitment Act taxes that are in effect. We pay the third highest gas taxes in the nation. So I spoke with Mountain States Policy Center's Transportation Policy Fellow, Bob Pinchu, about this. He has some details about what will hit you come Wednesday.
So last year, elected officials, and it was signed by the governor, passed a bill, a transportation funding bill that included an automatic increase in gas taxes. So typically in the past, when elected officials wanted to, build a bunch of projects, they then put out a project list and then also, the taxes necessary to fund that list. Instead, what's different about the gas tax increase this year is that it's automatic. There are no new projects that they have to, sell to the voters to agree to a tax increase. It's now a tax that it will be occurring every single year to just automatically raise the fuel taxes that Washingtonians pay every time they fill up.
Now, again, this increased state gas tax comes on top of the federal gas tax that we pay of 18.4 cents and carbon fees that are paid by us drivers for the Climate Commitment Act. That's about 52 cents right now, I'm told. Supporters of this, of course, say that we need to adjust this regularly for inflation. But opponents say, if we're going to increase the state gas tax that's supposed to only go to fund projects, show me what the projects are and let voters decide whether they want to raise their gas taxes for that. Because despite the high gas taxes that we pay here in the state of Washington, our highways and bridges, if you're a driver, I don't have to tell you, are in a state of disrepair. In fact, according to the most recent report from the Reason Foundation, who studies all the states as far as their repair and cost effectiveness, what you're paying in, what you're getting out, bang for your buck on gas taxes, we're near the very bottom of the barrel.
Washington, a recent report from the Reason Foundation, they put this report out for more than 2 decades, analyzes, different states, how their approach to transportation spending and the results from that. And Washington continues to rank pretty low in terms of spending and of road quality. And so Washington ranked 48th in the country. So not too good of results for Washington. The other point is that the new one of the new mechanisms here, this automatic increase, doesn't have that accountability built into it that you kind of mentioned. Typically taxpayers can go, hey, I'm going to be paying more, so will I see the results on the road that reflect those higher prices, and they can judge whether or not they support it or don't support it. With this new legislation, it's an automatic increase. So that accountability measure is sort of absent, and that's one of the things that we've highlighted that's wrong, or that's potentially troublesome about these automatic increases is that there's a little bit less accountability than we've seen in the past.
Now, according to AAA Washington, the average gas price today in the state of Washington for unleaded is $5.19 a gallon. It's $5.58 in King County. And our poor friends up in the San Juans always pay the most in the state. They're beholden because they are islands. So once the gas gets there, you're kind of out of luck as far as, going to the cheaper gas down the street. I don't think they even have any Walmarts or any other Costco's. Do they have Costco's in the islands? I really doubt they do. That's where the rest of us drive around to find cheaper gas, right? That is going to continue to be an issue. And also interesting, and I'm going to be writing an article about this either later this week or maybe because it's the holiday shortened week, it'll be next week. But the Eastern Washington and Southwest Washington communities that are driving into our neighboring states to get gas instead of filling it up here. I would do it too. If I lived in Vancouver and say worked in Portland, or I worked in Spokane and I drive across the border into Idaho to fill up. I looked this up. Now, Idaho's gas prices today are 4.72 a gallon. And if you can drive into Idaho and fill up, it's even cheaper, 4.11 per gallon on average today, again, according to AAA gas. And we've got school districts in Eastern Washington that are now fueling their entire fleet, their school buses, up for diesel across the border line into Idaho. So we raised the gas price here, but are we getting any increased tax revenue from that? Maybe not, because more folks that are going to drive across state lines where it's cheaper, if it's also convenient for them to do so. So that's something to keep in mind. Policy planners might want to keep that in mind. So Washington State begins today on the 1st of July paying out monthly benefits for the WA Cares program. This is the mandatory payroll tax that is funding long-term care in our state. Now, this offers a lifetime benefit of up to $36,500 for long-term care services. Again, through that payroll tax, which if you don't look at your pay stub, a lot of us just have auto deposit and rarely check it. But if you do, you'll see that Washington's long-term care fund takes 58 cents out of every $100 that you earn in the state of Washington. Again, unless you have opted out by proving you have a private long-term care insurance policy. So let's say you make $85,000 a year in the state of Washington, lower than the average income. The WA Cares Fund will take $493 a year from you. You don't get any say in that. They take your $500, they put it into the long-term cares fund, and maybe someday you need that benefit. Maybe someday you don't, and then others get your money. That is honestly the way the program is designed at this point. But Governor Bob Ferguson celebrated the WA Cares benefits launch at a home with this news conference in Tukwila yesterday.
We're here, of course, to celebrate the beginning of a first in the nation program, where once again Washington State is leading the way on a really important issue facing folks across the country and here in Washington State. Starting tomorrow, we're excited to say, WA Cares will begin paying its first benefits to Washingtonians who need support for their long-term care needs. We're here, of course, at the home of Evelyn Wade, who relies on her niece Sonia to be her family caregiver. Please join me in a round of applause for them for hosting us today. And Evelyn, I hope you don't mind me saying, Evelyn's 87 years old. She still walks a couple miles around the neighborhood. I think she was saying just about every day. Super impressive. She's been here at this home, I think, for over 30 years. And so this is really what this program's all about, right? Is providing a help to folks for exactly the situation you're going to hear more about from Sonia in a few minutes. So I'll keep my remarks brief so we can hear from folks directly impacted by this wonderful program. But it's important to point out that in the United States, 1 in 4 adults is a caregiver. Close to 500,000 Washingtonians will experience the need for long-term care service or support within the next decade. But for most people, paying for that is, as you might imagine, a struggle. Less than 3% of Americans have a private long-term care insurance policy or enough personal savings to pay out of pocket for long-term care support and services.
Now, according to the Washington Department of Social and Health Services, about 500,000 Washingtonians will need long-term care services of some type in the next decade. So that could be you need meals delivered because you can't, do meal prep or go to the grocery store. You need a ramp built outside your home because you've got a walker or a wheelchair, or you need some other kind of, modifications in your home. Maybe it's, shower modifications, adding a bar to hang on to or something like that. There's any number of things that your long-term cares benefit can be used for. Also in-home care services, or should you need to be placed in a facility, you've got that benefit. Of course, critics say $36,500 doesn't go very far in assisted living in the state of Washington. If you have a loved one in any of those facilities, especially the more expensive ones like memory care, you realize that benefit isn't going to go very long. Now, there is some good news in the program's initial rollout, even according to critics. One of those critics being Elizabeth New with Washington Policy Center. She heads up their Centers for Worker Rights and Healthcare at WPC. And she's been a critic well before we started even having, these payroll deductions for the Walk Cares program. But she says the good news is that the application process seems to be going fairly smoothly for these very first folks going to receive benefits. The way the program is written, it allows up to 45 days to process. So you apply to receive it. They've got 45 days to find out if, in fact, you qualify. Did you pay in enough? Did you work enough hours? But it's only taking about 8 days on average at this point. But keep in mind, they've only processed a very small number of applicants so far because you have to have been paying in from day one of this. So the last 3 years you have to have paid in. And you have to now need long term care support of some type. So that's a really small pool of folks at this point. Very few applicants, very few people have even applied. And then it's about 50%, I guess, of those that have applied so far that have been approved for these benefit payouts. So I spoke with Elizabeth New of Washington Policy Center this morning about her ongoing concerns.
All that aside, the main guts of the program, I still have trouble with. One, we all have life needs. This saves for one life need that lawmakers have chosen. I would rather see people keep more of their wages. I see this as a worker penalty. If our state really believes in this, it should pursue something else out of the general fund, not have a payroll tax paying for it. There's also Medicaid long-term care available to people in need. This program is not for people in need. In some cases, you have low-income workers giving 58 cents for every $100, handing it over to people with no need for taxpayer dependency. This is not making Washington more affordable. It's making it less affordable, and it's at the hands of our state government.
Now, supporters argue that the Walk Cares program fills a gap left by Medicare and private insurance because, of course, most Americans can't afford a private long term care policy. You may recall that there was that narrow opt out window before they started taking those auto deductions from our paychecks, where people could prove they either already had a long term care private insurance policy or they could get one. So there was this mad rush, and about 500,000 people did opt out, in that narrow window. They either, provided attestation that they already had a policy or they got one. But then we had a lot of insurance providers in the state of Washington stop accepting applications because they were worried people were just going to sign up and get a policy and then dump it, sign up so they could prove I've got my policy. Don't take money out of my paycheck, Walk Harris program, but then dump the policy. And so they stopped even processing applications. So a lot of people that wanted to get a private plan to opt out were unable to do so. But one of New's other issues with the whole program is that no matter how much money you make, say you only make $20,000, you're still having 58 cents out of every $100 you earn taken out. And especially lower income people with the economy right now might really need that extra money that instead is being deducted out of every paycheck.
We meet our needs in various ways. We use real estate, we use inheritance. Some people who are lucky enough to have it do. Savings, investments. There are all these ways, often with better return of investment, that we could be preparing for long-term care or meeting our long-term care needs. And this gives you one option. The state is managing it. It creates a huge administrative burden for the state. I think it's misguided.
Now, again, that lifetime benefit of $36,500 is going to grow automatically with inflation each year. And according to the Walk Harris Fund website, which I checked today, by 2033, that benefit is projected to reach about $43,400. Again, critics say that's still not going to be enough to provide long-term care services, especially if, the need is to be in an assisted care facility. And then finally, one of the big issues in this year's Washington Supreme Court races is how the court handles tax related cases as a constitutional challenge to the state's new income tax as that moves forward toward the bench. It's going to be at least a year, maybe more. Voters may well actually have an initiative to consider as early as this fall's ballot. More to come on that later this week. But in position 7, we have former King County Public Defender Kareem Merchant challenging Chief Justice Deborah Stevens, who authored the court's majority opinion, Deborah Stevens did, in the case called Quinn v. State. And that was the 2023 ruling that upheld Washington's capital gains tax. Now, opponents argued the tax was an unconstitutional income tax, but the court ruled it was to be considered an excise tax and was not in conflict with our state constitution. Now, Merchant says that distinction matters a great deal because it increases the legislature's tax authority. And my colleague, Tim Clauser, specifically asked Merchant, candidate for that position, what he thinks the court and Chief Justice Stevens may have gotten wrong.
In State versus Quinn, the court upheld Washington's capital gains tax. You've referenced it a little bit by ruling it was an excise tax rather than an income tax, like the opponents had argued. What did you make of that ruling, and what, if anything, do you think that your opponent got wrong, or your opponent in the majority got wrong in that?
The legislature has complete discretion for excise taxes. They can tax that to the moon. They have the ability to tax, and there's nothing that can stop them from doing an excise tax, which is generally a tax on the benefit of being able to use something or on a transaction of some kind. So a great example of that is like we have the privilege of using a car. So they can tax anything to do with a car, whether it's gas, whether it's car tabs, they have the ability to do that. That's their prerogative, and that's completely within their constitutional authority. But they are incredibly limited on their ability to tax on property. And the Quinn decision determined that capital gains are not income. It's an excise tax. And you need to step back and just reasonably think about this one concept. It's just basic business concept. When you are buying and selling, when I buy something for $2 and I turn around and sell it for $3, I have a $1 profit. I have a $1 gain. The Supreme Court is saying that $1 gain is not income. The IRS sees it differently. And so that's the biggest point, that they said that that a capital gain is not income. Right? That blows me away just on the threshold matter of it, and just disregarding the fact of what the fact that the IRS thinks it doesn't matter what the IRS defines it as, it's what we define it as. And so that kind of took me back for a second. But then we start thinking about, is this an excise tax? And well, if it taxes the transaction, yeah, 100% it would be an excise tax. But guess what? It only taxes the transaction when there's a gain. It doesn't tax the transaction when you break even. It doesn't tax the transaction when there's a loss. So is that really an excise tax? And anytime, it takes like 52 pages to be able to explain that, you have to really go through and bury it. And it's just a lot to go through. You have to unpack it because it's trickery. I think that, it's 52 pages long to be able to explain why capital gains are not income, why property is not income. Sorry, why capital gains are not property. But then Justice Gordon MacLeod is Justice Gordon MacLeod and Justice Johnson, who is retiring this year. In their dissent, I mean, the next 19 words, it's just so logical. And it just completely debunks everything that the Chief Justice had wrote in the previous 52 pages. And it's capital gains are income, incomes are property. Therefore, I knew I was going to blow the third line, but I'll let you guys read it and find out. But it flows logically, and I think the Supreme Court got that one wrong.
So again, we are less than 6 weeks from the August 4th primary here in the state of Washington, when the field of candidates for these Supreme Court races are going to be narrowed down to 2. We have a top 2 primary. That means regardless of any political affiliation for any position, the top 2 vote getters then advance on to the November general election. So that's it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. It's the last day of the month, June 30th. We ring in July tomorrow, and I hope you will join us again on Wednesday. Have a great day.